Sociologists have posed the question, how does a person become more ethical, where they are concerned about or care for the needs of others? And they have discovered that people become more generous, compassionate, and merciful towards others whenever others are more generous, compassionate, and merciful towards them. And that well-known sociologist, Robert Wuthal, who was the director of the University Center for the Study of Religion at Princeton, tells the story about Jack Casey. Jack was a firefighter and rescue worker, and one day he was called to the scene of an accident alongside a highway, and it was a scary situation. A truck had been overturned, and a man was pinned down underneath it, and around him the gasoline was leaking and dripping all over the ground. And they were worried that any spark could ignite the gasoline and cause further tragedy. So this man, paralyzed by fear, crying out for any kind of help, he is afraid of dying. When Jack was young, he was forced to get multiple teeth removed, and he was terrified. The dentist's office is already scary to a child, but he would have to receive general anesthesia. He was afraid about being put to sleep. He was scared about possible pain, and he still remembers the nurse that sat next to the dental chair, holding his hand and softly saying, "Don't worry, I will be right here the entire time." And when Jack heard the man crying out from underneath the truck, he was transported back to that moment in his life. So he got down on the ground and inched over as close to the man as he could get, where he could look him in the eye, and he kept saying, "I am right here. I am not going to leave you." And later on, when the man had been transported to the hospital and he was medically stable, Jack went by to see him. And sitting there next to his bed, the man kept saying, "I am so thankful you were there, but I think you were crazy to stay with me. Because if something happened, both of us would have been casualties." And Jack said, "It is the one thing that I could do." That he didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want to win an award. He was simply making a decision out of the character that had been formed inside of him when he had experienced generosity, compassion, and mercy. And it does not make sense unless we have experienced those same things in our lives. And we might wonder this morning, what experiences did Amos have, that prophet who did not think of himself as a prophet when he looked in the mirror, that he was simply a herdsman, just a dresser of sycamore trees? But he was also shaped by mercy himself, because he said, "You that trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land, God will never forget." what you have done. That Amos did not want others taking advantage of or ignoring those who lived in poverty. Because Amos knew that so often they are blamed for problems that do not belong to them. They are held at a disadvantage in ways that are hurtful to them. That what was the experience that Amos had where that did not sit well with him? That Amos was unconcerned with the gross domestic product. He did not spend his days focused on the ticker tape of the stock market. He was more concerned with how people treated others. That he did not focus solely on self-preservation, but on service. And it does not make sense unless we have been served ourselves. And Jesus tells that parable about a rich man who had a manager who is in deep trouble because he had mismanaged the rich man's property. And the same word is used in this parable that is used in the parable about the prodigal son, where it says that the younger son squandered everything that he had been given. That this manager had acted recklessly. He had been self-centered. He had performed in ways that were dishonest. And it was a serious indictment. It was a breach of his contract. So the rich man was coming to bring the news that the manager would be fired. And it sent him into this frenzied panic. He could not see a future where he did not have this job. He wasn't capable of doing anything else. And he didn't have any friends to call on who might have a spare couch he could sleep on. So he decided to make friends in questionable ways. That he called together all these folks who owed the rich man a great debt, and he pulled out the ledger and opened it up and picked up his eraser. And he said, "You owe 100 jugs of olive oil?" He cut it in half. "You now owe 50. And he looked down the page and he said, "You owe 100 containers of wheat." And he erased that number and instead wrote 80. And these people were more than thankful. They were elated. So now this manager had people who would be concerned about him when he no longer had a job. It says that this rich man found out about all of this and complimented the manager because of his shrewdness. And that's an interesting word. Not oftentimes thought about in a positive light. But perhaps we get a hint that this parable is really trying to teach us something about the gospel, because no matter how impressed this rich man was, he was still losing a lot of money. And I'm pretty sure he would not have given this manager a genuine compliment. That this manager acted shrewdly. And Jesus invites us to do the same. But we are called to act shrewdly in terms of generosity, compassion, and and mercy. Because Jesus says we cannot serve God and wealth. And it is shrewd because it works against the normal ways of this world. That whenever we act generously, compassionately, or mercifully, we are living into the ways of Jesus, and it does not make sense unless we consider the love of Christ. The Nobel Peace Prize was named for Alfred Nobel. He was a Swedish chemist, engineer, inventor in the 19th century. Most of his inventions were weapons and ammunition used in war. He is best known for inventing dynamite, and he made a fortune mass producing those weapons. When his brother Ludwig Nobel passed away in France, the press made a mistake. They reported that Alfred Nobel had died. And the headlines the very next day all over Europe said, "The merchant of death is dead." The article went on to say how he had made a fortune finding faster ways to kill more people than ever before. So sitting in his favorite chair that morning, sipping a cup of coffee, reading the headlines, Alfred Nobel saw how others saw him. Not as a brilliant inventor, but as the merchant of death. And it woke him up that, like the manager, he felt as if he had squandered so much. And like the manager, he wanted to write a different story for his life. So he changed his last will and testament. And he devoted his wealth to the pursuit of peace. And it does not make sense unless we learn to see the shrewdness of the gospel as it works against the normal ways of this world, where generosity, compassion, and mercy do not always make sense in the face of our normal expectations and concerns around our lives, unless we have experienced those things ourselves. And it could be something as small as a friend staying with us, saying, "I will not let you face this alone." And perhaps we can all name someone who stayed with us, who sat with us in our grief, who listened to us when we are hurting, who said, "You do not have to do this alone." And whether we realize it or not, it can make us shrewd, like the gospel is shrewd, making us more generous, compassionate, and merciful towards others. That as many times as we see it, it doesn't always make sense unless we consider the love of Christ. Amen.